did this to my daughter? Who did this to my daughter? God, why how this kind of thing to happen to me, my only daughter? God, you have forsaken me, oh. Rose, Rita's late mom, shouted in pain while she shoved brown moldy clay into the 6 feet deep grave before her. She was shaking and shivering as she stood there with her 2 sons who stood beside her. Rose wore a big black gown, a white handkerchief in her right hand to clean tears from her eyes. Her eyes were both red like pepper, due to too much crying. People gathered around the graveside behind the house at the right side of the compound where the grave was dug. Kelvin stood beside Rita's brother, while family members paid their last respects to late Rita. He wore a white native shirt and trousers and a black pumps to complement his dressing. His mother came along with him to the burial and they acted like people who knew nothing about what happened. Kelvin was even crying and shedding crocodile tears while he shoved sand into the grave. Afterwards, his mother cleaned his eyes with the white handkerchief she held in her hand. She hugged him afterwards and walked him out of the graveside. Before Kelvin and his mother left the burial ceremony, they gave Mr. Rose a check of 5 million naira. Rose thanked them, they turned back and walked out of the parlor where the condolence visit was held. The drive took them home afterwards. Mrs. Rose was so desperate to get justice for her daughter by finding the person who murdered her daughter, she went to the police station in her street and reopened the case again. Rita's murder case has been on hold for some weeks now due to her burial and other things. Officer, please, I want to reopen the case of my daughter's murder, Mrs. Rose said as she stood before the front wooden desk of the police station counter when she walked in. Officer Ezekiel sucked in air, looking at his fellow officer in a suspicious manner. He turned to Rose and said, "Madam, that your case has been officially closed because no evidence to get the killer. Please, madam, allow your daughter to rest in peace. All this long talk won't bring her back." Oh. Officer Ezekiel said, looking at Rose. No, don't tell me that, oh officer. How can I allow the person that murdered my daughter to go free? No, I can't. Please, I want to see your boss in this station, Mrs. Rose shouted on top of her voice, looking at the officer Ezekiel. The other officer was busy writing down names on a long notebook before him. Ezekiel raised his hand, pointing it towards the right side of the room towards the inspector office. Mrs. Rita walked in after knocking. "Please sit down, madam," Inspector Maduka said, looking at her as he sat down dressed in his police uniform with his cap on his head. His pot-belly were pushed out while he sat down on the wooden chair with a 5 inches tall wooden table in front of him. She dragged the chair and sat down. "Madam, welcome. Sorry for your loss. Oh, I hope you are recovering," he asked. Mrs. Rose didn't answer him. She dropped her black bag on a chair beside her and went straight to the point. "Inspector, please, your boys said you have closed the murder case of my late daughter. Please, Inspector, don't. Oh, we need to find the idiot who killed my lovely girl who has a bright future to accomplish before that demon took it away," she said in a cracky voice. Along the way, tears began to drop down her eyes. She used her white handkerchief to clean it off. "Sorry, madam, but this decision was given from out headquarters. I don't have any power to go against it, madam. We have tried our best but to no avail. No evidence to work with. Please bear with us, madam. Just give everything to God, He will punish those miscreants," he said, looking at her. Mrs. Rose pleaded and begged him, but to no avail. Chief Emeka has secretly paid the boss at the headquarters to close the case some weeks ago when she noticed the case was making progress. Mr. Rose walked out of the office, crying and shedding tears. She was shattered but vowed never to give up. Weeks later, through the help of a close friend, Mr. Rose employed a private investigator and paid him a huge amount of money to find the killer of her daughter. Mrs. Rose was sitting on the black fancy couch in the parlor that evening reading her black-covered Good News Bible. She held a blue rosary in her right hand while praying and meditating in the parlor. Mrs. Rose is still in great pain over the death of her daughter. She sat down in the parlor praying to God to find the killer of her late daughter. Mrs. Rose is a honey-like fair woman in her late 40s. She is a businesswoman who owns a big shop in the main market of the state, where she sells foodstuffs and other household groceries. She was married to Kelechi, a businessman who she took over him after his death. They were blessed with 3 lovely children, late Rita the only girl and 2 lovely sons in their teens age schooling in a boarding school which is a bit far from home. It was hazy Saturday evening, when late Kelechi was driving home to his family after business that day. Some group of guys consisting of 5 armed young men, mostly dark in complexion, stopped him on the way that evening. The road is a lonely path with tall grasses on both sides. It is one of the shortest paths to get to Mr. Kelechi's house in time. Since it was already late and Mr. Kelechi wanted to get home as soon as possible, he followed that road that evening. Kelechi came down from his black Toyota Camry car and began to beg them, "Please don't kill me, please don't kill me." Kelechi begged, looking at the guys who surrounded him. Immediately he came down from his car. In a cracking and shivering lips, Kelechi said, "Please, you can take the car, I have some money too in the car. Please don't kill me," he said, looking at the guys who were pointing a gun at different points towards his body. Kelechi recognized one of the guys holding a gun at his head. His name is Ifeanyi. Ifeanyi is a dark tall guy, thick and masculine in body form. Ifeanyi and Kelechi lived in the same neighborhood. Ifeanyi is also the gang leader of the group. As Kelechi was begging, he recognized Ifeanyi, but Ifeanyi acted like he didn't know him. "Please Ifeanyi, don't kill me, I promise never to say anything about this in my entire lifetime. Please don't kill me." One of the gang guy looked at Ifeanyi and said, "Boss, like you know this guy," he said, looking at Ifeanyi. Kelechi was kneeling in their midst begging for his life. "Boss, this man go cast us all. If we don't kill him, he needs to die oh." One of the guy who stood beside Ifeanyi said, encouraging Ifeanyi not to let Kelechi live. After much deliberation and discussion, Ifeanyi pointed local pistol gun towards Kelechi's head. He shouted him twice. They all entered the car and ran away. Unfortunately, policemen who were on patrol that evening were driving through that path when they heard the resounding noise of the one-mouthed local pistol that sounds like a bomb when it releases a bullet. The policeman chased Ifeanyi and his gang as fast as they can. While trying to escape, Ifeanyi missed control of the car and drove into a cliff. The car went down the cliff. Ifeanyi and his gang died in the car after it crashed. About 6:30 p.m., Mrs. Rose's black Samsung phone rang and she picked it up. "Hello officer, good evening. Hope there is information about my late daughter's death," she asked. She stood up and walked towards her room while listening to him. "Yes madam, there is good news oh. I have successfully tracked the location of your daughter's phone," the private investigator said. He continued, "Please get ready tomorrow, we are going to arrest whoever is in possession of the phone." "Okay, no problem." She sucked in air and continued, "Thank you officer for helping out." Mrs. Rose could sleep that night. She sat on her bed, anxiously waiting for the next day to see the bastard who took her daughter's life away. The phone was found in Kelvin's house, unfortunately, stuck in a big greenish flower spot with the help of the tracking device. While Scorpion threw the body down, fortunately her phone fell inside the flower pot. "Officer, I am innocent, I don't know how this phone got to this house oh," Kelvin shouted as one of the officers forced him to get inside their black Toyota Camry police car. Mrs. Rose stood there crying and lost in thought, wondering what was happening. "How can Kelvin do this to my daughter? I thought he really loved her. No, I can't believe it. No, I can't believe it oh," she murmured in her mind, looking at Kelvin's parents who stood there defending their son. "Officer, don't push my son like that, he is innocent oh. Don't push him or you will pay for it, I promise." Chief Emeka ranted on top of his voice, looking at the policeman. His hands were shaking, with his veins swollen out, depicting his rage. Kelvin was taken away to the police station, where he was detained while investigation commenced. Chief Emeka tried to bribe his son's way out, but the case was too powerful for money to buy it. Rita's phone was accessed during the investigation. Details of the boat she booked to Kelvin's house became the final evidence that proved Kelvin officially guilty for the daughter of Rita. A month later, Kelvin was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor for the death of Miss Rita. The members of the court were all sitting in the courtroom waiting for the judge to walk in. They all stood up. Immediately the female judge walked into her chamber that morning. Kelvin sat on the right side of the courtroom beside his lawyers. His parents sat behind him cheering him up. Mr. Kelvin Okafor, after going through the evidence and details presented by this prestigious court, I have found that you are guilty for the murder of Miss Rita Okorik. This court hereby states you to life imprisonment with hard labor for the murder of Miss Rita. The female judge said, looking at Kelvin, who stood at the right side of the courtroom. She banged the hammer mallet and walked away. Hot tears began to roll down Kelvin's cheeks as the officer forced him out of the courtroom. His mother tried to hug him, but the policeman stopped her from doing that. Kelvin was taken, drove to the state prison where he would spend the rest of his lifetime. The end. If you love this story, say a prayer for me and drop what you learn on the comment section. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like, comment and share for more updates.